Bob Bazans, and I'm an alcoholic. Sober through the grace of God, the power of AA sponsorship, since the 10th of December, 1967, and for that I'm very grateful. Thank everybody. But this has not been an ordinary experience, and this is a conversation, my wife, to let you know that the level of neurosis that you are dealing with, it's almost up to the level of Charlie Carney's neurosis, and I'm not as articulate as Charlie, but I am as neurotic as Charlie. I don't know if it was after Vince's talk. I guess I'm walking down the hall, and my wife is walking with me, and she says, "I know what you're thinking," which is not a good. When your wife says, "I know what you're thinking," or "we have to talk," it is never exactly what you want to hear. She said, "You're now comparing yourself to Ivester. You've gone through Howard. Howard had handouts. Everybody else is better prepared." And she says, "Yeah, I just want you to feel free to drop that conversation." And but that's the conversation, I think, that keeps us active in Alcoholics Anonymous. It is the conversation of the ego. It is not the grounded conversation when we're plugged in. It is not the basis of our recovery. It is the enemy talking, but it's a loud, familiar pattern of thinking that we all have. A program recommend, so Katie walked up and said, "I'm going to do a reading, but I don't want to do a reading that's going to interfere with your talk or one that you really want to talk about." If I picked a reading out of the big book that I want to talk about, it was the one that Katie read. It's my favorite paragraph or two paragraphs in the big book, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But we've talked all the way through about all the changes that we go through, and when we get to the end of step 9, the book, we have the promises, and then the book talks a lot about that we're preparing ourselves for a spiritual life. As the work of the first 9 steps, we prepare ourselves for the adventure of a new life. A continuous look at the assets and liabilities and a real desire to learn and grow are absolute necessities for us. So I was taught when I came in, I was 23 years old when I walked into AA, 24 by a week when I took my last drink. I was a guy who had somewhat similar to Tom and the other speakers you talked about. I had a lot of ability. I was a great starter. I interviewed well. I just had trouble living, and I could get most of the way through the process. Like Vince, I walked out of Notre Dame middle of my senior year. I was just a series of almost, which this room was full of. I mean, we just have these wonderful stories of surgeons and jet pilots and washed out teachers, and it is. No, but we are. We are people of, I was just being with Gail. Reminded me. The talks have all been so wonderful. Ivester is one of the hardest men for me to be with in the world. He's one of the men I admire the most in the program of your heroes. Tom's one of my heroes. And but I was having the feeling as I was listening to Tom talk, when my wife is saying you're comparing yourself to Ivester, which is not a good idea for any of us in the audience would know, is Tom didn't do it. It was done through him. He cooperated with the power. Tom was not the power. The other thing that I noticed so strongly about Ivester is he simply become himself. And the more I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous, if someone said, "What is the cost of alcoholism?" The cost of alcoholism is you don't get to live your life. You don't get to take the box, which is your gift, which most of us still have under the table in the box with the wrapping, with the ribbon still on it. You don't get to play your instrument. I don't know if there's any more cost that you could have in life than not getting to play the instrument that you were intended to play in the orchestra of life. We'd all be diminished, I think, if Tom wasn't able to play his instrument. And we're a flawed group of people. There isn't any of us that end up perfect. But I think when you listen to the different people who have shared, they've become themselves. They've taken a journey. They've shed the things that were in their way for the journey, and they've simply been able to become themselves. Vince was talking about, he went back, he finished his education, he went back and he completed his relationship with his family. He and Pat do all that work. The thing I just like about Vince used to drive around and give sandwiches. I think it was you, wasn't it, Vince, to go around to the homeless. You have all your sponsees that are into their own heads and involved with their own problems, and they would go around and pass out blankets and sandwiches to some of the people that were less fortunate. I mean, that wasn't who anybody thought we were when we were 25 and 30 years old. But lo and behold, as we take these steps, as we shed the things that are in our way, as the book talks about, they're about to be dispelled, and they were dispelled. And and I love what Ivister talked about, the step mechanics. We've seen an enormous amount of step work. We've never seen as much teaching about the steps as we have. Society's evolved. We're an oral society. And you can go back at the tape table and get all the tapes on, Bob and Harry, Dick and Jane, and the 12 steps. And we're all looking for a tip, something that's going to be give us another piece of information. Almost no one in this room is missing any information. No, but our mind thinks we are. I mean, when we go to, when Joe and Charlie first started doing their deal and other people started to talk, there are certain people who are as good with Scott is as good with the book as anybody you're going to see. We all go with an expectation that we're going to learn something that's really going to make a difference. And most of the time it doesn't, because it's not a problem of information. Almost no one in this room is missing information about what our problems are in our life today. We may not be conscious to them, but we're not missing any information. And almost no one in this room is missing any information about what the solution is. But all of us have trouble doing it. I don't, but a lot of people. But there's an enormous amount of sobriety in this room. But if the world decided to have an asshole contest, we could field a team. And I don't know if we'd win, but I think we'd be in the money. The talks have all singularly been wonderful. This is a conversation Gail was talking about last night, that there's something that you pulled out of her. She's given her history thing a lot of different places, but she's never quite gotten the response that she's gotten. And that's because of who's in this room. It makes an enormous difference about who you're communicating with. There is a two-way, there's a pitching and catching that goes on. And if you keep throwing a fastball and no one ever interacts with it, you just end up with a lot of balls behind, building up. Or like playing tennis, all the balls are one side of the net, and it doesn't work. But that hasn't happened here this weekend. The magic of this weekend has been that we've been in a conversation about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the talks have all been great. And I do compare myself, but that's the conversation that I've given myself more freedom today to ignore than I ever have. I can't stop the conversation. I don't invite it. I don't like it. But I can't do anything about it other than ignore it. Just like a playful child that whispers in my ear, it just doesn't mean anything. I go do that. Ralph, I figured, I hadn't heard Ralph before, so I figured he just got lucky. And, the rest of his talks might not be that good. I mean, the other guys I've heard, so, you do it. And Howard is kind of intimidating. Howard just did a wonderful job for me on the fourth step. I have a few, just wonderful. And some of the stuff you talked about, I'm going to use on an ongoing basis. And the idea that you gave me that I had never had is the idea that I could use sex. Now, I've substituted the word gambling or eating or shopping or spending money in different places in the book with guys, but the idea that sex inventory for anything that I use to drop out, anything that I use so I don't have to attend to life. I mean, that's the problem that we have. I mean, we have this noise in our head. When we listen and live in that noise, we aren't happy. There is no joy. So most of us have ways of dropping out. Some of them are pretty destructive. Some of them are not so destructive. But we're living in a place. I mean, having an AA meeting in a casino is like waiting for a bus in a whorehouse. I mean, it is. You really have to be focused to. I suppose Bob figures if we have, we got 500 or 600 people, you lose 10 or 15, it isn't that big of a deal. Isn't that big of a deal, It's but if you walk out in that room, it's about as good a visual of how much money and energy and life and spirit people need to expend to not address life. Now, none of us do that, so we should be able to pick up. But it's an ongoing. It really is an ongoing thing. Vince and Pat were extraordinary on step 8 and 9. I have heard them before, and I think the contribution that they do is marvelous. Charlie is, I love his humor. I love his sensitivity. I love his intellect. And so it's been quite an extraordinary contribution that we have had this weekend, and you've pulled out. I think there's a seriousness in this room, and it's been a great conversation. I don't know how many times I've heard Cliff, but it's been a lot. I've never heard him as strong. He gave the same talk 2 months ago when I was there in this geographic area, and the difference was extraordinary. Again, I think because of us and because of where he was at. Listening to Cliff last night was like drinking out of a fire hydrant. It was clear, nothing in the way. It was just channeling through. It was as good a talk on the traditions without doing the and that's the difference. He just didn't run the traditions. He just didn't run the book. But he was the book. He was the experience. He was the principles. And that's the thing that, most of us need to do is get in touch with the principles. The spiritual principles are what are the solution to the dilemma. The dilemma we have is created almost entirely in our head. And by the time we take the 9th step, and there's been this tremendous change that Katie talked about. We aren't fighting anything. It's been a release. When we're tempted, we recoil. Those are not small things. We've been surrendered by that process. We've been surrendered by alcohol and drugs, and we're brought to the program. We're beaten up to a point where our ego is beaten down enough that we're teachable, that we listen. So most of us have a period of time where we talk about the honeymoon in Alcoholics Now. What's the honeymoon? Well, it's a period of time where the circumstances are terrible, but we're okay. You ask a question, you get an answer, got an answer, and you ask someone what to do, they tell you what to do, and you go do it. You go to the meeting, and you're not engaged, I'm trying to think of who that wonderful Hightower, Earl, and he does a thing about the mind of the newcomer, at the meeting, that unbelievable, conversation that's going on. So you're talking to the guys and gals that you're working with. You ask them how they are, which is not always a good idea. And they do a dump. It's not a communication. It is a dump. A switch gets turned on, and their internal conversation becomes, hearable, and they do a dump. It is like, CNN, during the Peterson murder or something. It is just, I mean, it really is. I mean, if you want to listen to what's going on in your head, go turn on, wait till some event happens where that horrible deal where the guy shot up the shopping center, and then they do 15 continuous hours of conjecture. Your daughter died. How did that make you feel? How did it make you feel that your daughter died? I mean, that's going on. So that's the noise that's going on in our head. If you ask the person how they are, the new person, that's what you get. But someday you ask them how they are, and they say, I'm okay. I'm a little crazy, but I'm okay. Went to the meeting last night. It's a different conversation. It's a conversation out of the action and the program that they are, not out of the conversation in their head. They have now some separation from the reality, and I don't know where the hell all this, I'm, kind of scattered this morning, but what happens to us is our book continuously talks about, and the 11th step talks about, increasing our conscious contact with God. What do we do in Alcoholics Anonymous? And I don't even know that often we're aware of it. We keep trying to describe what we do, and I think that's why we want to become somewhat more mechanical. When we bring a new person in, it's like a wet, frozen log into a bonfire. That person comes in the room unconscious. And when they're in the rooms, we see something in them and for them that they can't see in and for themselves. We're on the other side of the experience that they are now, going to have. And we create, what I'm talking about was happening this weekend, a collective consciousness. And that person drafts on the collective consciousness that is in that room. And they don't even know it. They just feel better in the room. Now, they may go, someone ask them why they feel better. They may give you a fact. They may give you something that Howard said. They may give you, but they have no idea. Most of us often don't have an idea. But there is something that happens when our minds and hearts are joined. There is a clearing that was in the room last night when Cliff gave that wonderful talk. That's in this room at this moment. And that's in the meetings that we have. And that person is plugged in to a different reality, plugged into a different part of themselves that they have not been able to access on any sort of willful or ongoing basis. And little by little, they are able to take that out of the rooms into their lives. And it takes quite a while before you're able to take that, take it out of the room. That's why we recommend that people go to so many meetings early in sobriety, is because we elevate their consciousness. We wake them up. I mean, most of us are sleepwalking when we walk. I mean, literally. A number of people talked about, Cliff talked about that woman who couldn't talk, who couldn't look at you, and I have these sponsees, and I say, you see those shadows out there? Those are people. It's but there is a different level of consciousness. I mean, when I'm serious when I say the problem is being unconscious. I mean, we talk about it in lots of different ways: self-centered fear, self-centeredness. I mean, the problem is that the self we're involved with isn't the real self. It's the false self. It's the ego. It's a construction. It's not who we are. If there was something that I could alter a little bit for us in Alcoholics Anonymous, is we're too connected to our stories. We're an oral society, and we love our stories, and we share our stories, but a lot of us have trouble escaping our stories. We come in here with the paradigm, and the box in the paradigm that we're involved in when we come in here is survival. Most of us just do enough to survive. If you need 30 grand a year to live, I mean, I have sponsees that if they accidentally make 25 in the first half of the year, they slow it down the second half so they can hit 30. It is, and they don't know that they're in a box called survival. They don't know they have a target. They don't know that this is going on. But they have trouble escaping the parameters that they feel are absolutely limiting their lives, the things that they don't do well, things that they can't do, things that they, and many of us sitting in the room have those same issues. We keep throwing our past forward and reliving it. The issues and problems we're dealing with in the room are not new. Hello? I mean, how old are they? A month? Give me a break. Is there anybody in the room with a reasonably serious problem that isn't at least 3 years old? And for those of us that are more mature, and I don't want to be negative, but there's the dilemma for me has been for an awful long time, if I have a good program and I'm sober 20 or 25 or 30 years, why do I still have problems? If the program works, why do I still have issues about overspending? Why do I still get angrier than is appropriate from time to time? Why do I, why am I that way with my wife on occasion? Well, I could tell you why that I'm with. So for me, the dilemma is that we're 5 years sober, we're 7 years sober, we're 10 years sober, and we still have issues with work, money, sex, living. When Tom talked about the mechanical approach to alcohol, and I want to be clear, there are times when doing things mechanical is just fine. That's all you got, baby. You got to go with it. There isn't anything wrong with putting one foot in front of the other. There isn't anything wrong with going to the meeting. Anything wrong with studying the book. But the book's the menu. You will starve to death eating the menu. Not funny. It is happening all over in our fellowship. There are people who have the first 164 pages memorized that I wouldn't go on a fishing trip with. They don't have good marriages. They can't. Their lives are not good. There are people who, it's not okay. Now, I'm not up here, I should give my diet talk. It's not that funny. So I'm not up here saying, follow me, I'm the guy that's got it together. What I'm saying is what we're talking about is life. There's no one that's got a lock on life. We're talking about living life and talking about developing a relationship with the God of our understanding. Are there experts on that? That isn't the word I'd use. There are teachers, there are wise people, there are people who are more enlightened and more conscious and more awake than others, but no one owns the territory. So when you get up and everybody, they've got an answer for everything. Give me a break. It's just not so. There isn't. I'll tell you, if you're married with kids, you can't have an answer for everything. Life is fired at you at point-blank range. There's no preparation for it. We keep trying to anticipate it, but the nature of life is it's very present. It's almost always different than we anticipate it to be, and there is no real preparation for life. Some of us try to reduce our lives to get only certain people who will put up with our crap and in them, in the boxes, and get jobs where they'll put up with whatever the hell we're doing, or, we try to accommodate and design our lives so that we don't have some of the issues that we would have if we were just kind of out there. That doesn't work. It always breaks down. It's good for a while, but it doesn't work. So what I'm talking about, and what I think is mostly the people in this room, are the practitioners, the journeymen and women of Alcoholics Anonymous, that are not perfect, but they're in the game. They got a helmet. They go to practice. They put the principles in action. They don't do it perfectly, but you can see what's going on. They aren't, and my early days in Alcoholics, it took me a much longer time than I'd like to admit for me to get in touch with what my defects of characters are. I didn't have a real good sense of that during my first year. My first inventory was a recitation of the things that were the most horrible things that I had done, the things that I thought separated me from everybody else in the world. And it wasn't into the causes and conditions, and it wasn't very insightful. During my second and third year, I got a pretty good list of what wasn't working. And for those of you who have heard me give my A talk, I had work issues. I had trouble getting up in the morning, I had trouble getting to work, I had trouble staying at work, and I had a little trouble working at work. Now, there are some people who don't have issues with that at all. They've got a work ethic, that's not their problem, they're on track. You could dump them in Alaska tomorrow and they're making, $35 an hour, doing great without an issue going on. I wasn't that guy. I had to grow up. I didn't grow up till I was 30. I was, enormous. Linda would not. I wish you weren't here. She would point out that there's a difference between getting taller and growing up. I think my immaturity is charming. I think it's part of the... But as you well know, not everybody in my family would agree with that. I had a gambling problem. I spent, 5 hours a day, 6 days a week gambling, playing backgammon. I was making $5 to $10 grand a year playing backgammon, thought it was like a second job. I was angry and sometimes physical with my children. That's still one of the things today that I feel the worst about. And I've always spent right up, I spend a lot of money. I'm a materialist, deeply shallow, I think is how Pat was talking about it last night. And Charlie was talking about shallowness. I love that joke where the guy's, he's a brand new Mercedes, very expensive Mercedes, driving along the deal, and the guy sideswipes him, and he's out, and it takes off, and he's outside his car, and he's just livid that this car has just got the mirror off, and the whole side of the car is taken off, and the highway patrolman comes up, and he's just screaming, I just bought this thing, I got this, I don't even have a license plate, and I'm going, and this jerk comes by, and the guy said, well, sir, calm down, I think you're in shock. He said, he just took your left arm off at the elbow. He said, my Rolex! It is, that would give you an insight into me that it was so in one way, the inventorying is Bill so closely links inventorying and the spiritual awakening together. The process of getting involved and discovering what is the unworkability of our lives, getting it up into our so how do you, first of all, you have to get it up into your consciousness. How do you do that? You have to name it. You know the power of naming? I mean, how many people in the room, the first time they had to raise their hand in the room and say they were an alcoholic? Not always a small deal. Some of us, it wasn't a big deal, but for some of us, naming it was a big deal. When I had a name that I was abusive to my children, that word almost couldn't get out of my mouth. I used to hit Peter once in a while because he was such a little jerk. That conversation I could have. I know it's inappropriate, but if you had Peter and what do you think, and this is what he did, and he got thrown, that's a real different conversation than you are abusive. Once you name it, it rises in your consciousness and you can see it. And you then have an opportunity to interact with it and manage it. When it's in the garage with the door closed, you don't. It's in your unconscious. But once you see it, you can start to, manage it just with God's help in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and you can direct your will and intention to the use of the steps and apply it to that behavior. And that's where the movement comes. How does the ego go about doing an inventory? It just wants information. It processes information. This isn't this isn't an issue of information. Everybody used the word transformation. This is not an improvement. This is closer to a sex change operation than it is an improvement. This is a major, it is a major shift. When you hear Jung talk about, with Roland, about the transformation, about all of a sudden the major ideas of a person's life were thrown out. All of a sudden. Not over a year, all of a sudden. Okay? Do you think that happened to Ivester? Of course. That's why it's like the story of Christmas. You could listen to that, and we sit here and listen to that, the power of that. That's the power. The goofy part about it is that all of us in the room, to some degree, have had that experience. We've had the problem of drinking removed. Probably the biggest issue we've had in our lives has been removed. And the process by which it was removed is not the process today that we're using to get rid of the other issues in our lives. We're looking for more. How many of us got it removed by studying it? No, but it was a change of heart. The information's good. The fact that it was a disease, the fact that it was physical, mental, and spiritual, the fact that it affected me when I wasn't drinking, were vital pieces of information to me. But what really happened is my heart changed. I heard something at a level that I hadn't heard before, and it altered me. And I'd heard it from doctors, I'd heard it from different people, but when I heard it with my heart, I drank twice after that, but it was very different. Wasn't the same. I drank on our honeymoon, and I drank out in California on a business trip, and it wasn't okay. It just wasn't okay. It didn't work. I wasn't, going to do that. So a lot of us, there's an awful lot of inventory going on without much change. And that's, in my life, that's even true. Accessing the power, because the power is God. You don't snap your little fingers and say, over here, get on this. I'd like this, And yet, it isn't like that isn't where we're going. It isn't like that who we have to use. It isn't like that we have to channel that power through our life. We have to. But you don't own it. It's not mechanical. If it was mechanical, every time you had a problem, you just click your heels and say the third step prayer, you'd be back in Kansas. There would be nothing wrong. And some of us talk as if that's all you have to do. You have a problem like this, go work with someone. You have a problem like this, go take a fourth step. Go inventory. I got people who inventory it. We're talking about Cliff dying. No. When I jump around a lot, but when Vince was talking about the step work that Cliff had done the last 15 or 20 years, what a marvel! And anybody who knew him, you could see a change. You can see changes when they happen internally in all of us. It isn't like you don't know that's going on. But last week we had a men's retreat for my spiritual group that I'm in. And one of the guys didn't come to the group, and he committed suicide on the Sunday of the retreat with 20 years of sobriety. And so I don't want to pretend that there aren't levels of desperation in this room. And I don't want to be negative, but I also don't want to be, not honest. It's just life. It isn't right or wrong. It's just life. There are issues that we're all dealing with and we struggle with. So inventorying, the mechanical process of inventorying, whether it's the spot inventory or the inventory we do at the end of the day or the inventory that we do with our sponsor who we get together with, say, monthly for kind of a work session or whoever it is, or if it's a semi-annual house cleaning the book talks about, or if it's a retreat that people go and they do, another fourth and fifth step or whatever that is. Those all are good things. The kind of instantaneous catching ourselves as we go through the day, with our defects of character, those are good things. You need an attitude. I sometimes think, if our primary purpose is to help the still suffering alcoholic, I understand why we have an ongoing conversation about if you don't do this, you're going to drink. For most of us in the room, that's not the issue. and I hesitate. It is the issue. It isn't like there aren't relapses. It isn't like we're not exposed to go drinking. It's not my issue on a day-to-day basis. I suspect if I get myself in a bad enough shape, it could become my issue. Or if I got stark raving nuts one day and had, the perfect storm, maybe I could get launched into taking a drink. I'd rather take a drink than commit suicide. I wish that man on Sunday would have drunk rather than put a gun to his head. I mean, that's somewhat heresy, but I do. I wish he would have, come spent the weekend with us and, gone through it. So we're not missing any information. If we go about so part of what I'm saying is, if you're bringing your ego to do the inventory, you're bringing a knife to the gunfight. All it's going to do is get you more information and more insight, like the more insight is somehow, and more information is going to make a difference and somehow motivate you in the process because you've got better data. Or you're going to listen to someone who's got a better technical process and another column. You need a fourth column, Howard. Okay. And Howard talked about the guys that are really dirty and tell jokes that were, they're funny but they're dirty. But Howard's jokes are clean but not funny. And I don't know what you do with that. He never addressed that. He never brought that up. And so the conversation that I'm involved with today, if you want to know what's going on in my life, is a conversation that is how do I deal with the unworkability that's going on in my life today. And the way that really I deal with it is probably more an 11-step thing. I don't have any shortage of the conversation about what's wrong. That is as loud a conversation in my life as it can be. It is too loud a conversation. It is an inappropriate, negative. It, left to its own self, it murders the psyche and destroys the spirit. It is not a responsible conversation, and it is one that I've tried to interact with all my life. I just recently have had kind of a breakthrough, and I'm going to talk about that. And, we'll see how the breakthrough is, but it seems kind of different. And what Scott's going to talk about in the 12th step is that, how do the changes take place? I mean, when Katie was talking about the reason I like that paragraph on page 84 or 85, it doesn't talk about the changes come because of effort. It says it's almost as if it's happening by itself. It's almost as if the problem's been removed. And that's how most of us felt about our issue of alcoholism. But it isn't how we feel about our pornography. It isn't how we feel about our debt. It isn't how we feel about our marriage. We don't feel like the problem's been removed, that we're in a position of neutrality. I mean, we don't feel that way at all. We feel like we're mired and caught in a web of circumstances, and we don't know our way out. And that's a matter of the heart. That's the matter of God. That is a problem and issue. Whether or not you can quit on a non-spiritual basis depends upon the degree to which you've lost control in the process to make the decision. And most of us, how could my wife have had that conversation with me going down, I think she was just lucky and she guessed. But other people would say I have a pattern of thinking. Which is killing me, which is not okay. And how would I get out of that pattern? By raising my consciousness. I mean, why do we drink? Because we lowered our consciousness. We're in pain. If you're in pain over any extended period of time, you're going to do something to get out of the pain. What did Charlie talk about? We're seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. I mean, that's just you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that one out. I mean, why do you think people are sitting at those machines 8 or 10 hours? I mean, and I'm not against it. It's fun, it's recreation. There's certain parts of it that are, just fine. But when you look at the face of many of the people at the machine, it doesn't look fine. I mean, we can I mean, you can see it in a meeting. I mean, you can, when someone walked up to Charlie and said, "What's wrong?" You know, I mean, we see it in each other's faces. You can kind of see if someone's okay or not okay. I don't know how we do that, but we can't always do it, but we can often do it. They're just the eyes are the windows of the soul. You can just, if we are not so involved with ourselves, I can take a look at Mike and take a look at it and think, yeah, he's good, he's fine. No, he's fine, he's okay. So we need to increase our conscious contact with God as we understand Him, but most of us don't know how to go about doing that, and a hell of a lot of us don't want to go about doing that, and many of us have never given any thought as to why we should do that. For those of us that are struggling with life, and I want to report to you that that's everybody. There are people who don't look like they are as much, but I don't know anybody who doesn't have stress or issues or, some negativity. My wife lives her life with a graciousness that I would like to apply for. She doesn't have it is so much work for me, and it kind of comes naturally for her. It almost irritates me. It isn't, she doesn't have to read the books I read. She doesn't have to, she just does her thing, has her own spiritual program. It's kind of like the difference between the people who, when they really wanted an answer, they'd go to Elsa, and when they wanted to delve into the whole thing, they'd go to Chuck. Because there were differences between those two. Elsa could have a 2-minute conversation with you and just nail it, and yet Chuck had an insight that was, he had an insight that is changing my life today. Gopher State Roundup, we had Chuck for the first 5 years. We had him at Gopher State Roundup, and he would hold court in the hotel room. And there'd be 40 or 50 of us at his feet listening to his deal. And he looked at me, and he pointed down to me, and he said, I asked him a question about something that wasn't working, and he says, the man in the street who's committing rape is doing as good as he knows how to do at that moment. When he knows better, he'll do better. When he has more light, that will not be an issue. And then he said to me, you already are as wonderful as you are ever going to be. And he said, I know you don't understand that. Well, Christ, I not only didn't like it, I mean, how many guys at 24 years of age, or 27, or was almost 30 when he said that to me, would want to believe or think that it's so that they're as wonderful as they're ever going to be? I mean, that's not good information if you've got a blow-up doll in the back of your car. It is. Yeah. Mine is for the HOV lane. It is not. And the oil on it is only because it gets coffee on it and it stains. But I believe that more today than I ever have in my entire life. I believe that the journey to finding God is a process of coming home. That there isn't anything to do. It is already done. As Chuck would say, what you're looking for, you're looking with. I never understood that when he said it either. So I think the problem that I have often is that I'm bringing the problem to the steps, not my heart. I'm bringing my intellect and my ego. I'm bringing the fact that I'm a bad guy who needs to be reshaped, corrected, improved, and that's been the change over the last couple of years that I want to talk about, and more recently. And that the solution is not information or technique or effort. How many people would if I sat you down and said, when you stopped drinking, did you use information, technique, and effort? That would not be how I think most of us would look backwards and describe. It's almost as if the problem fell away because of the process that we involved ourselves in the recovery. It just disappeared. It was no longer appropriate. We saw it in a way that we had not been able to see it before, and it el gano. It just went away. It was removed. We're not tempted. When it comes up, we think, oh no. I mean, it's like an automatic reaction. That's as a result of the surrender and the continuance of the work that we do in Alcoholics Anonymous to maintain that attitude. And most of us do a great job with respect to drinking and sobriety with the use of the spiritual principles. But then we have this conversation like, you can't do certain things or you're going to drink again. Most of the people in this room, myself included, who cross over our own lines are not going to drink immediately. We're just going to be jerks. We're just going to continue to hurt the people in our lives. When Howard talked about, my way of inventorying, if you're having trouble with the columns, just get your boss and your wife and your mom and dad, your brother and sisters, and a couple guys from your group and your sponsor, bring them over to the house and say, I'm having trouble identifying my defect of character. We have a step in AA, and I wonder if you'd help. Pass out pencils and paper, and you'd have a pretty good start. But most of us wouldn't call that meeting because we don't want to change. We don't think we can change. We think it's who we are. It's like killing ourselves. I mean, the ego's got a conversation with you. Look, Harry, go to the meetings. Take the steps. Do the study. Go to the conferences. But get this straight. This isn't changing. Talk about it. Inventory it. Pray about it. But this isn't changing. This is just the way it is. I don't care if you want to pretend it's going to change, that's great. If that helps you, that's fine. My first 8 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, I tried to change and failed, tried and failed, but I still grew. But there comes a time where if you're going to grow, you got to change. You got to deal with the gambling problem and the anger problem and the money problem and the spouse problem. Or it's going to stop you. At that point, you got two roads to go on. You either continue on the road that Tom talked about and Howard talked about, everybody's talked about this weekend. You either pick the road of recovery and become a man or a woman in your recovery, the 6th and the 7th step, an adult rather than a child, and you take a road and say, I'm going to try to become the man or woman that I'm supposed to be in my own life. Or you build an addition onto your house to accommodate the problem. Gamblers hang out with the gamblers, chasers hang out with the chasers, and you train the people in your life. We'll talk about the steps, traditions, and concepts, but you stay out of my face, I'll stay out of yours. Deal? Bad deal. You'd rather have a person who you'd say to, if you see me where I'm really out of line, please nicely grab me for a cup of coffee, and and say to me, you really seem like you're out of sorts. I promise not to kill you. I may have a bad immediate reaction, but it will not affect our friendship. And I've got 3 or 4 of those in my life, and those are the most, those are the conversations that you catch up. I didn't have a chance to Larry and I had a 2-minute conversation. Howard and I had a 5-minute, Daryl. Well, you just check in. And what they want to know is, how is it? So I'm saying, well, mostly good. I've made 4 or 5 business decisions the last 2 or 3 years, and I'm jammed up financially, but mostly okay. Now, that's a check-in. The idea of that conversation is that I'm going to do a report in the 2-minute conversation that I have, and you're going to walk away knowing whether or not I checked in with you. It isn't, I don't have to do a fist step. It's just a couple of fellow travelers having a conversation about how it's going. I don't get any tips. Okay, they know I'm a traveler. They know that I've been traveling for a while. They know that I'll probably figure it out, and I've got 3 or 4 guys or gals on my list. I got a spiritual advisor and a sponsor, and I go to meetings. They know that somehow I may be struggling, but they know that I'm on the path in the game with my helmet and I'm a player. And they're just checking in because, and it's confirmation for all of us that it isn't perfect, but I'm living in a solution. And this is what I'm doing. So, the only way that we will be able to, if we don't improve our consciousness, which is the purpose of the 11th step, we're doomed to continue to do what we've been doing, some of which is fine, but much of which doesn't work. And the only way that we will change the things that don't work, I think effectively, is how we changed is how we got out of the problem with drugs and alcohol. Is we have to have a spiritual awakening. We have to raise our consciousness. Why do we go out to the slot machines? Why do we do all the different things that we do in our life to avoid life? Is to avoid pain. Alcohol worked. It lowered your consciousness. It dumbed us down. How do we get well? How do we start to experience the joy? How did the change happen? By raising our consciousness. And in the raising of our consciousness, we have a connection with our God self, with our higher power. And in that space, there is no pain. There's a clearing. Maybe not right at this moment, but about 15 minutes ago in the conversation that we're having, there was just this, in the same thing, it was like almost throughout Cliff's talk last night, there was a clearing. It was okay. For everybody, it was okay. It wasn't, we didn't have our focus on the little chicken crap things that catches our attention all the time when we walked in the room. We were present. We were in the presence of our higher power. We were listening to a spiritual conversation, and it was okay. And, really quite wonderful. And the wonderful part about our program is that it's not just a program of abstinence. It's not just, we say it's physical, but it's also mental and spiritual. Once we take our last drink or drug, what we do is we use the steps to change, to find a different way to live. And in that process to find a different way to live, we have an awakening. And the more awake we are, the more we can see things. The more we can see things, the more we can interact with them, manage them, and the more we have an opportunity to guide our lives and to get rid of the things that are unworkable. Most of us are far too attached to our past. We talk about our past and we talk about our story as if it really exists rather than it's a construction. We talk about ourselves as if it really exists rather than a construction. Goodbye, Sam. But it's really a construction. All our past is a reservoir of memory. It's just a library of thoughts. What makes it our past and what makes it our story and what makes it ourselves is our interpretation. We go into that library and we pick out certain books and make certain decisions about ourselves. We construct our past. We construct who we think we are. I mean, one of the most powerful conversations I had about my abusive relationship with especially Peter, was one day I got into the idea that if there were 10 men that were Peter's fathers, only one would strike Peter. Or 2, I don't know what the statistics are, but not 10. So where's the problem? Is the problem because Peter got thrown out of school? Is the problem because Peter got arrested? Is the problem? No. The problem, if my brother was Peter's father, he would not be abusive with Peter. Is the problem because my father acted that way with me? No. He acted that way with a number of us. And he was a wonderful man. That does not typify my father, but in those days, if you got in trouble, you got batted around a little bit. And it wasn't the worst thing in the world. It wasn't the best thing in the world, but it wasn't the end of the world. But when you realize, I can remember when Peter, I don't know if I should tell this story or not tell this story, but I'll tell the story. Peter started to be angry and somewhat abusive to his younger brother. And I was looking at that, and that was Norb to Bob, Bob to Peter, Peter to Daniel. And I said, this crap's going to stop. And I brought him to a psychologist, and we went in to do some work on anger. We worked for an entire day. And the 2 things this guy asked me, he said, were you an angry kid? I said, no. He said, when did you become angry? He said, I'll bet you $1 it was when you became a father. And it was like someone punched me in the chest. I had a computer program in the library marked Dad, and I never booted it up until I became a father. And all of a sudden, when I'm a dad, I take the disk out, shove it in the computer, boot it up, and I've got a whole bunch of conditioned thinking that's going on in this thing, and all this responsibility, and I've got patterns, and I'm just doing what my dad did. And the other thing that he told me that was so powerful for me, he said, angry people are blamers. He said, angry people always know what's wrong with the other person, and the more angry they are, it gives them permission, the more you're at fault, is it gives me permission to be more angry. So if if the waitress spills coffee on your shoes, she just made a mistake, no big deal. If you're rageful, you think she did it on purpose, she's a lousy waitress, she's done it before, and that gives us permission to go into that. So the process of inventorying, I think we need to not just bring our ego and intellect to it, we need to bring our heart to the process. What we're looking for is to get connected to our God selves. The place that I'm going to end up, and this is the change that has happened for me that I think has made an enormous difference, is I am not a broken person, a bad guy, trying to minimize my defects of character. I believe my defects of character are patterns of thought that don't serve me. They aren't muscle, they aren't tissue, they aren't part of my being. They are simply habits and thoughts that are not part of my God self, but that I've been conditioned over a period of time and I use and they don't work. Now, can you change habits and thoughts? Pretty easily. But in order to change them, you have to become aware of them. How do you become aware of them? The book talks about looking at our motivation, doing inventorying, taking a look at what doesn't work. Emotions. Most of us are trying to change our emotions. I'm an angry guy. Our emotions are the warning signals. They're just fine. There aren't any particularly bad emotions. We don't interact with them well. But what the emotions are is that those signals, like the rough part of the, when you're driving on a highway and the shoulder, they have those ribs that they put on the shoulders that kind of wake you up when you go do that. That's what emotions are. Emotions are the body's reaction to thoughts that we have. And rather than being bad, what they are is the warning signals that we're getting off the track of our spiritual connection. Once our emotional contact gets to a certain point, we have trouble staying in the game. But if we would take a look at our emotions and be more friendly with our emotions and understand that they are simply our soul saying, slow down, Tiger. Don't do this. You don't have to go there. This is just, it's a warning signal to wake you up and say, stay centered. Stay in the moment. Because each of us has a story and a pattern of thought that the moment we have that reaction, we get caught up and pulled aside. We think it's new. I mean, how much conditioned thinking do we have? Most of the guys that I read talk about, they think that our patterns of thought are like 95% repetitive. Ask your wife. Ask your husband when you're in front of the shopkeeper who is taking a half hour to write up the bill like I was yesterday, rather than what would be normal if it wasn't being trained and it wasn't new and to go. My wife could tell you exactly what was going through my mind. Now, I wasn't inappropriate. I didn't that time overreact and go through the sort of process. But anybody who knows me knows what I was going through. When I was going through it, I didn't feel like it was number 1,298 that I had done that. I thought it was this woman who was incompetent, who was in front of me, who was untrained, just trying to irritate me so no responsibility whatsoever, no sense of the pattern, so that's why one of the reasons why we inventory, one of the reasons. But if we would get open and start to see the patterns in our lives that don't work, what was going on in my mind when I went through is just calm down. Do not be a jerk. You've got a pattern of thought that you can let that train go through the station. You do not have to get in that train, lock yourself in the club car. Just let the train go through the station, Bob, and just stand where you are. You're with 3 other people. It's, relax. Just be here right now. But most of us have conditioned where we don't even think about that. It just gets collapsed. For most of us, in those moments, the reality is printed on your eyeball. There is no space. The increase in consciousness happens when you get it off your eyeball and you get it out here, where I can take a look at it and say, something's wrong. I haven't had that thought in a long time. This is nuts. You need to go to a meeting, go to a movie, talk to your wife, talk to your sponsor. Just let's not pay attention. Let's not interact with that. I don't have to interact with that. So if we're going to access, and lastly, before I get into kind of the last thing I want to say, I think our society today is about as sick as it has ever been. The good news is I think there's a lot of profoundly spiritual things that are going on. There's increased interest in spirituality, meditation. I think there's a dedication to taking the steps and working with others and doing things that I see around our meetings that I think are wonderful and going on. But I want us to know, and I want me to know, that I am living my life in a 40-mile-an-hour wind. That when you can sit in your room on the internet and have sex, gambling, and drugs. You can order drugs in these days. I mean, it's just the damnedest thing I've ever seen. I mean, you could, get Oxycontin over the internet. You can gamble so you can lose all your money and never leave your bedroom. You can, our society today is as commercialized and as capitalistic as it has ever been. We just have seen the most profound example of that with this mortgage crisis. I mean, if the financial industries of our country 40 years ago would no more have done what happened in the last 2 or 3 years, I mean, they'd be in jail. It was pandering. It was intentional. I mean, they just, everybody, there was just enough blame to go around to everybody. And the damage that they've caused, the economic and personal damage that was caused by the greed of the people who are trying to do that, it's just phenomenal. And most of us can't, when you get put in front of those sorts of temptations about getting a 105% mortgage and rationalizing that it's today it's a 4%. I got a 4% loan, like you never think that it might go to 8 or 9 or, might have to make a full payment or, reverse mortgages. I mean, this is the industry I'm in. It is just ungodly that, you go in there. We are exposed to 200 or 300 commercials a day, magazines, television. Commercials used to give information back in the old days. What they do now, they just show the product and a pair of breasts. I mean, it is just, they lock it up. And the clear message is if you don't have this product, if you're not okay, something's wrong with you. If you want to improve who you are, it's all about, younger women, faster horses, more money, bigger houses. I mean, that's what it's about. I mean, the message is you're not okay the way you are. That message is being gotten to us subtly everywhere. You are not okay. You need this pair of sunglasses. I mean, I go over to the sober house. I mean, these guys and gals often don't have, guys that I work with in the house don't have, many of them don't have jobs or they have sober jobs, but they all have the latest cell phone. I mean, they could not literally exist without, and today it might be necessary to have a cell phone, but you look at it, they almost couldn't exist without, they've got Starbucks cups. I buy my coffees half the time at Super America for 69 cents. They have, they're sitting there with a $3 coffee, and it's just invisible that if a $3 coffee is a $100 a month issue. When they're making, it's just, the level of consciousness is just like non-existent, not awake, not doing that. So if you wonder why sometimes when you're not doing work, why you're drifting, it's because there's a wind. Society, when I came in the 60s, and I think Tom would say in the 50s, there was an enormous support for recovery. I mean, it just go out, get a job, get your life together. When I came into AA, almost everybody was married. They were churched. They were educated at whatever level they were going to be educated. Today, with the drugs and alcohol happening so young, we get people that haven't finished their education, are not church, are not educated. Their sense of life, I mean, their big picture is 2 days. 2 days. They don't have a sense about, no one's building the cathedral. The best they're doing is laying bricks. They don't have a big picture. They don't know what kind of a man they want to be. And that's our society. They know what kind of jeans they want to wear. They know what kind of car they have to have. But they don't know who they want to be in their own lives. The examples that I have when I looked around the rooms about, I mean, one of the changes, I love what Cliff said about that insight about why we don't get as many 12-step calls. I think that's absolutely correct. But the groups were smaller. And we didn't get a new guy we got a new guy every 2 weeks or, some period of time. And that person had a chance to get assimilated and brought in, and it was closer. We didn't even go to as many, we didn't go to as many meetings. I guess I was going to 5, 6, 7, but a couple of them were luncheon meetings. But we were all connected. We knew when there was a problem with someone. Today the groups I go to are often, I go to 2 or 3 groups that have 30, and I go to a couple of groups that have 150. It's a movement sort of thing, and it's a social sort of thing. There's dating and all the stuff that's going on in the groups. But what I'm saying today is that there's a suck to society. There's a message that is going on. We have become as secularized as we could possibly be. You can't talk about God. So how are most of us are not even interested in that conversation. And yet our book is saying that's the solution. You want a solution? It's increase your God consciousness. You increase your God consciousness, you are home. You are connected to your intrinsic wisdom. You have access to the mainframe. You've been walking around with a little handheld computer trying to figure out what's on the screen and what to do with it. Why don't you plug into the mainframe? And when that opens up, it's all okay. When we're connected with our true selves, there's nothing wrong. I believe that in many ways we are perfect crystal magnets that have been dragged through the junkyard of life. And when we show up in Alcoholics Anonymous, we are a 5-foot sphere of metal wrapped around this magnet, and that the process of doing the steps, going to meetings, talking to your sponsor, and working with others, we start to remove what is in the way of our God consciousness. And little by little, we start to get returned to who we are. And when we are connected to our God consciousness, we know. Most of that, if I had a big circle up here, and in that circle was everything there was to know. And I took a piece of that pie and said, this is what you know. And took another piece of the pie and said, this is what you don't know. The rest of the pie is what you don't know and don't know you don't know. Almost everything that you need and I need when we came into the program was what we didn't know and didn't know we didn't know. It came from a place where we were not looking. There was something, and everyone said you can't learn things you don't already know. How many times have you started a meeting and heard someone say something, and you don't go all agree with it? Instead just goes, oh yeah. It isn't like it's okay. It isn't like we think it's correct. We know it is correct. And how do we know? We never heard it before. Because we have a knower. Because when we're connected to the God of our understanding, when we've had a spiritual awakening, when we've done an inventory and we have some sort of sense of the issues and problems that are in our lives, and then through prayer and meditation, we try to increase our conscious contact with God. And if we don't increase our consciousness, and what we've been doing is the best we know how to do, we're simply going to continue to do whatever we have been doing. You want to know what the next 5 years are going to be like? Throw the last 5 ahead of you. How many want to buy in that program? Some of us, I mean, it isn't like it's horrible. I'm just saying that most of our reaction to that, especially if we're in a free society, is, oh, horrible. But the only way that's going to change is for us to wake up. And the way for us to wake up is by taking these steps. But taking them in a way that you don't just bring your head to the process. And by living these steps. The steps are something we study, the stuff, the hard hat, the green berets are out, and, the answer's in the black, read the black part. You want an answer, it's in the black part. It's like they think God wrote the big book and Bill wrote the 12 and 12 in his office. Like it isn't, like everything you need to know is just in the 164 pages. This is the answer. It's on page 83. There's no question about it. There is a question about it. It's a signpost, and it points us to God, not to your head, not to the intellect. The information and the insight is helpful, but it is not powerful enough to bring about the change because we have passed the point where information is going to have, or insight is going to have any effect on our lives. And so how do you get your heart involved? How do you, if the answer to the problem is surrender, that Chuck talked about, how do you go make someone surrender? You can't even describe it. You can dance around it. You can have a conversation. And I think in the magical moments, we can have an experience of that. But it's of God. And all of us have had those magical moments in conversations with sponsees and the conversations with other people where it comes alive, where we just get a sense that it's going to be okay. But if we put ourselves and our hearts in that process, we're going to move, we're moving towards the light. And that is, we're moving towards love. We're moving towards God. And I don't think the fear that I always had is what someone talked about. I'd have to go to China, do something if I was going to really pay for my life. But I really think that what's happening to me is that I'm coming home. That I am not a broken person. That I am a person who has conditioned patterns of thought that it looks like, what do they call this, hologram? It looks like a hologram, all those thoughts woven together. It appears to be me, but it's not me. There is a real me that when I'm connected to that consciousness, I can watch that other person. I can watch the thought. I am the consciousness in which that happens. And when I am connected to that consciousness, through the steps, doing the work in my life, I am connected to the source. I am the source. I'm not all what the source is. But I am home. And in that space, with some guidance, I know what's okay. I know what's not okay. I'm at peace in that space. I know more about who I am in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous than any other place I go. I just do. Why is that? It's because of the consciousness that you supplied in that room. Some of the work that we need to do after a period of time in Alcoholics Anonymous is not communal. It is personal. You have to, each of us, God could and would if he was sought, each of us has to take some time, I believe, doing some spiritual work. If you're stuck or things aren't very good, go ask someone about a book that you might read that would crack open, just let a little light in the process and stimulate a pattern of thought. I think the many of us are in patterns. I think a lot of us use our sobriety. We don't have to change. I got 20 years of sobriety. It's like my merit badge. I got my master's card. And don't tell me it doesn't work. It works. When I really want to have the right conversation, I talk about how many meetings I go to, how many guys I sponsor, and how much sobriety I got. What does that have to do with being in financial trouble? What does that have to do with being self-centered? What does that have to do about having my life in order? Doesn't have anything. If you're breathing, you're going to have issues. And if you're going to have issues, and if you're in this program, and if you're a real practitioner, You're going to be in the process. It isn't going to be perfect. It's going to be pithy. It's life. But I'll tell you something wonderful. It works. And I'll tell you something else wonderful. When you and I connect to our God selves, there is a feeling of joy and peace. Most of us, if you ask someone quickly what they want happiness. Happiness is more conditioned on circumstances, being aligned to the way we want them. Joy and peace are not contingent upon circumstances. Clint Hodges had joy and peace as God. My friend who committed suicide did not. He was in despair. He could not see that. He was in the problem. He was convinced that the way he saw the problem was who he was. And there was no light, and he was shut down and alone. He did not know that he was as wonderful as Tom August. He was. And if he came in this program and did the work and opened himself up, then he'd find his gift. And again, there's a partial answer. It just isn't the removal of the problem. It is the falling away as we wake up. The same way our drinking fell away. The same way that when I was at 8 years of sobriety and got down to 6 and 7 steps of death, the 4 of the major problems of my life fell off. Now I had to do some work to maintain that spiritual condition so that it didn't return, because I think there's always skid marks. I think there are. I think it's, it's just always a little invitation to return as you go to do that. So, all right, today, I mean, the chances of me being continuously married for 40 years and falling in love with my wife today is my wife when I married her. Having a good relationship with all 3 of our sons. Of having the same sponsor that I had when I walked in front of Alcoholics Anonymous, who has contributed more to my life than I could possibly explain. Many of you would not think, he's not the guy who you would headline at a conference to do a dissertation on the book. He was the book. He just was the book. He was the accident. He was the 12-step book, and it was perfect for me. So I've been given, how do you explain it? How many of us get the question, does he go to meetings? By those of family members, people who know, why does he go to meetings? Which is really a big question. My life is so much better than it would have been had I never had a problem with alcohol. And I really think that when we talk about the alcoholism of the spiritual spirit, and we are looking to come home, and that throwing out our old ideas, which is, I think, the past. I want the past available. I don't want to forget the past. I don't want to be the past. I don't think our past and our stories describe who we are. They're funny, they're entertaining, they're important part of our culture, but they're not who we be. And the program is a program of changing how we be. Most of us to change what we do. In order to change what we do, you have to change how you be, and change how you be. Transformation is God. And that process, which isn't a conversation that is easy to have in our society today. There are fewer places to go